podium. Hopefully we'll be joined by other folks. My name is Jorge Mariscal. I want to thank the Department of History, Professor Danny Widener, who's co-sponsoring this event, and also the Dimensions of Culture program from Thurgood Marshall College, otherwise known as Lumumba Zapata College, to those of us who can remember. People are looking at me like, what the fuck is he talking about? That was the student proposed name for Third College, Lumumba Zapata. All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to listen to Mike Davis, and I think, because he's local, we take him for granted a little bit. But when we announced the event, we started getting messages from all over the country going, what? Mike's still around? And he's still around, and he's very, very much engaged still. To me, Mike is a voice from a past that I'd rather live in than the present that we have. It's a time of social movements and mass mobilizations and something that we used to call political economy. It's hard to find any faculty person on this campus talking about those things in a way that some of us would recognize. And so Mike brings that genealogy with him and is still very much engaged in the present, and today's talk is going to bring us very much into the present. And the reality of this institution that many of us have toiled at for decade after decade, and actually seen it change. Danny Widener and I were talking this morning, and when I got here, I mean, it was still a kind of classic liberal institution, public institution. And now, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's a neoconservative, semi-privatized, radically disengaged institution, if I can be so bold as to say that. And yet we're global and we're student-centered and all the other rhetoric that we hear about UCSD. But I think Mike will shed some light on that. The other great thing about Mike's writing is, as you all know or you wouldn't be here, is his sense of humor. And as our graduate student Michael Odom said to me half an hour ago before I walked over here, reading Mike Davis is reading a text that could have been written by George Carlin had he written books. So, and that's a compliment. So let me, please help me welcome Mike Davis.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chip in on a debate that's roiled this campus now for half a century. Half a century. I was actually admitted in 1964 to the first graduating class in UCSD. Is it really 50 years old? Yes, it is. And for 50 years, debating three fundamental questions. The first is the centrality of military research and the past, present, and future of UCSD. The second is the extraordinary degree in which the goals and priorities of the university are completely integrated with those of corporations in San Diego, many of them corporations that UCSD essentially created. And the third question is the disenfranchisement of students at UCSD. And I'm thinking of students not so much in terms of your tuitions or as customers of the University of California, but students as advocates for their communities, working class communities, communities of color. Because that's what the great battle years and years ago over the Third College was all about, the community's stake in UCSD. But let me begin first with a mystery. And I don't know how many of you frequently have socialist visitors from all over the world as house guests, but I do. And I always ask them, well, what's your impression of San Diego? What do you think? And invariably, they give the same answer anybody else would. Oh, it's fantastic. The weather downtown. They may not talk about the West T-shirt contest, but they'll babble on about everything else we know and love in San Diego. This is startling for me, because this is the most militarized metropolitan area on earth. And growing up in San Diego in the 1950s, my father, by the way, spent 25 years cutting meat in San Diego Ice and Cold Storage Company, which I determined the other night, fitting the maps together, seems to be home plate in Petco Stadium. But everything about my childhood was about war, technology, and science. Okay? I went to hear Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, speak at Hoover High School. I was there on opening day of General Dynamics' big Atlas missile plant on Kearney Mesa. My uncle had started off in World War II running a hamburger stand across the gate from Plant 1 of Consolidated Aircraft, became Consolidated VoLTE Convair General Dynamics. Fully 13% of all the military aircraft in World War II were built in San Diego. And the 50s was the kind of golden age of aircraft manufacture. I used to go as part of the kind of paramilitarized safety patrol at my school in Bostonia. Used to go to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot once a year. They'd give us flamethrower exhibitions and stuff. It was really neat. On weekends, you'd go on tours of ships in port, ranging from submarines to the aircraft carriers. And all through my childhood and all through my young adult life, the fleet came and went, dropping millions and millions of pounds of bombs on Pyongyang and Hanoi and all over the world. Everything in San Diego was implicated in this. And of course, in the 1950s, I was a frighteningly gung-ho patriot. Although I did sometimes wonder why it is that we never fought the Germans when we played war games, which is all boys in my time did. Why were we always fighting the Japanese or the Chinese? I thought the Germans were the really bad guys. But apart from those doubts, I was part of the chorus singing the praises of San Diego's military-industrial complex. So how is it possible to come to the city and not see it? Yet in some strange way, what's most dramatically in front of us has become almost invisible, I think. So I invented in my mind a kind of imaginary tour of San Diego, which I hope you won't mind listening to, which I would like to take my left-wing visitors on if they didn't want to go to the beach or the other things, or to the zoo. And it would be called the Tour of the Iron Triangle, because one side of the triangle is the military itself, okay, 102,000 active duty military personnel in San Diego County. The base of it are the military contractors and the industries and firms related to them. And the third side of it is this campus, most particularly Scripps Institute of Oceanography, which played a central role in the development of underseas naval warfare, and today, above all, the Jacobs School of Engineering. Okay, hop in my pickup truck. Actually, I don't have a pickup anymore. I sold it. I started a group called White Guys in Pickup Trucks Against White Guys in Pickup Trucks. When I'm getting old and my Tundra V8 four-wheel drive is getting a little too much for me. But imagine I did have my old pickup truck and I put you in the seat next to me. Actually, we wouldn't get in the truck first. You'd come in the top of my garage. We lived next to Golden Hill Elementary School. From the top of my garage, you just look downhill at Naval Base San Diego, 32nd Street Naval Base, which in my childhood was where the Ghost Fleet, the mothballed fleet, lived. Hundreds of escort carriers, destroyers, other stuff that they weren't using, but they weren't yet ready to completely scrap. Now it's become the command post, the center of the Pacific Fleet. It has about 25,000 civilian and Navy personnel there on any day of the week, and it's home to 11 amphibious attack ships. They're the ones that look like kind of smaller aircraft carriers. Each of them carries an expeditionary unit of Marines, 2,200 men, and everything. They have tanks, helicopters, vertical takeoff stuff. 11 of them in San Diego to transport the 1st Marine Division to any far corner of the world. And then we'd have to get in my truck because the palm tree across the street is blotted out to view, and we'd drive across, go down through Barrio Logan, get up on the Coronado Bridge. Voila! Amphibious Warfare Base Coronado, famous home of the Navy SEALs, and a whole series of tenant commands, some of which are very, seemingly very cryptic or enigmatic. 5,000 personnel there, plus thousands of people who come there for training. And then, just on the right, North Island itself, North Island Naval Air Force Base, home of Navy aviation. 33,000 to 35,000 people at North Island when the big supercarriers are in. And then, from the bridge, you look out and there's Point Loma. And it so happens that several of my childhood friends, after they came back from Vietnam, guys I still hang out with, old codgers, worked at the old Naval Electronics Lab, which is now part of Naval Base Point Loma, and of something known as Spar Wars. The Space and Warfare Systems Command of the U.S. Navy. You say Spar Wars, you imagine people throwing Perrier bottles at each other or something. And this is the very heart of development of technologies of electronic warfare, reconnaissance for the U.S. Navy, something that UCSD was involved in before it was UCSD. Going back to the Second World War and the University of California's Division of War Research on Point Loma, which heavily involved Scripps Institute of Oceanography. But there's all kinds of other stuff there. There are the nuclear submarines, and then there are the pets of the Navy. I'm sure some of you may have had this experience. I certainly have twice. I'm running along and jogging along on Harbor Island, and suddenly this dolphin in the water. And my first thought, it's escaped from SeaWorld or something. But gee, it's all for free. You can sit here and then suddenly a naval fast boat, one of those little boats, and they have the, this flat thing that the dolphins jump on. And they go back to their home at Point Loma, where the Navy, and they recruit for this from UCSD. I saw one of the recruitment things from Spar Wars. Are you interested in marine mammals? Do you love cuddly sea lions and porpoises? Well, there's old warriors now. They've been doing research of them since 1970. Apparently, porpoises, Navy-trained porpoises, were involved in both invasions of Basra. They guard the aircraft carriers in the harbor, and they're used up at Bremerton. And some years ago, there was a huge debate because the independent newspaper in England claimed that they had been equipped with a device that shoots some kind of projectile or bullet to kill enemy frogmen. And the Navy insisted, oh no, it's not a lethal weapon, it merely stuns them. But do you have any idea what by now are probably 6th or 7th generation military dolphins are like, these animals that we admire and see as sympathetic, peaceful inhabitants of the ocean? But then there's more. At Spar Wars, they're also developing killer robots. Look it up. You'll find fascinating account of a journalist who was scared out of his pants by one of these things. Comes up to him and says something like, "Lethal Fourth authorized, stop where you are." And the new robotics center, which your chancellors, I think, opened up this year at UCSD, will undoubtedly be making a contribution to that. But my favorite place is San Diego's Afghanistan. If you get up on 8 and you head way out past the Elkhorn Valley where I grew up, way out to East County, you'll see a little sign that says Potrero. There's a road that goes from 8 to Campo. And this is where the Navy, many, many years ago, built a radio telescope. It's now the Naval Mountain Warfare Training Center. It resembles Afghanistan. Have you seen pictures of Afghanistan? It looks a bit like, it's really rugged, and so is eastern San Diego County. So that's where the SEALs are honing their skills for Afghanistan. And then if you go way up to the northeast corner of the county, to Warner Springs, best place if you want to take a ride on a glider, the Navy and Marines have their Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape facility, SARE. Have any of you seen the movie G.I. Jane? You know, Viggo Mortensen gets to beat the shit out of, what's her name? Yeah, that's up there. And during the revelations about CIA and military torture, one of the explanations put forth on why this was justifiable, and this is in, I believe, the legal document prepared by Professor Wu, now at the University of California Law School, was that American service people, Marine and Naval aviators, SEALs and so on, they were waterboarded after they were captured in Warner Springs and taken back to whatever is up there in the mile. And finally, to tip all this off, the island that lays just offshore, that if it were 2 miles closer, we'd probably see. The biggest of the Channel Islands, San Clemente Island, which has been bombed to smithereens constantly, day by day, since 1942, when it was taken over by the War Department. And they recently built a $6 million American embassy out there. San Clemente become independent. We need an embassy to, you know, because the Indians who lived out there, they're all gone. No, a serious mock-up embassy that could be a playground for, you know, Delta Force guys and SEALs. You know, they'd storm it and seize it. They'd defend it, go back and forth. Who knows what they have out there? It's kind of the Disneyland of the American Navy. One could go on and on. This is by far not an exhaustive list of what's here. And of course, the Marines have the Marine Corps, you know, recruit depot. They have Miramar, which they took over from Navy's Top Gun program. And they have 42,000 personnel and civilian employees at Camp Pendleton, which is now also increasingly a training ground for Homeland Security and the FBI for the INS. Because now at Camp Pendleton they have all these mock-ups of Iraqi and Afghani villages, but apparently you can also practice apprehending people at the border. But okay, so that's the military grand tour. And he survived being chased through the mountains of Afghanistan and waterboarded out in Warner Springs. We come to the military contractors themselves, and there are at least 300 significant military contractors, the majority of them located here: Torrey Pines Mesa, Sereno Valley, Carmel Valley, Sereno Mesa, I think it's, or whatever it's called. And rather than talk in elaborate length about it, I'm simply going to give you a list of some of the military contractors who are corporate affiliates of the Jacobs School of Engineering. And corporate affiliate just doesn't mean that they show up at hiring fair. It means through the university's Connect program, which some years ago is now a kind of independent body, and is the great pride of this university, to set up a civic technology platform so that both inventions and discoveries in science and technology could immediately become commercialized, but also so that industry could communicate to university researchers, what they wanted, what they weren't interested in. Okay. So these corporate affiliates are more than just, names on a list. They're active participants in decision-making in the university at some level, at least in science and engineering. And at the top of the list is Leidos. My God, what is Leidos? Well, Leidos is the renamed version of Scientific Applications International Corporation. It is the biggest contractor to the National Security Agency, and one of the two biggest to the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, to the FBI. And it sits here right next to a campus. It's an enormous company, and it's become the kind of icon for the dark evil corporation that nobody knows anything about. In fact, it doesn't really make much of anything. What it is, it's created a huge brain trust to rent expertise to government intelligence agencies, the military, law enforcement. I forget what replaced the Atomic Energy Commission, whatever that is now. And you go to Leidos and explain your problem or your need, and they'll give you a team of people who are experts. And Leidos, for the sake as it used to be, is just a revolving door between particularly the CIA, DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Division of the Department of Defense, and Leidos. There have been innumerable assistant secretaries, undersecretaries of defense, Bobby Inman, intelligence chief for the Navy. I think he's now, if he's alive, I think he's chancellor of the University of Texas. They've all come and go. And though when you think of UCSD engineering, the first thing that comes to mind is Irwin Jacobs and Qualcomm, the wireless telecommunications revolution. It's predated by these guys, and it's predated by another member, another corporate affiliate, General Atomic. Now, General Atomic was set up here by General Dynamics in the 1950s. In this stunning building somewhere in back of us. General Dynamics was a conglomerate that consolidated a huge block of defense companies. In San Diego, it had Atlas Missile, Convair, and General Atomic was originally its nuclear energy research arm. They were into all kinds of things. Remember, this is back in the 50s. We're all going to drive atomic cars. Okay? Our homes would be powered by nuclear fusion. Anything was possible. And General Dynamics was the key partner to Roger Revelle in the creation of UCSD. Although they didn't want UCSD. They wanted a Caltech to make up the deficit in San Diego's aerospace industry and in naval research. That old-fashioned engineering really wasn't what needed. They needed more and more physics. They needed more and more theory to develop new technologies. And Revelle, who'd been an officer in the Navy, a pioneer of undersea warfare, he came out of a team of guys who developed sonar in World War II, saw this as a public utility for the military industries and the armed forces in which San Diego's economy was based. Now let me say here in defense of Revelle and the military-industrial complex that a lot of major science came out of mapping the ocean's beds all across the world in order that we could send nuclear submarines that were carrying MIRV missiles that could wipe out 7 million people in Moscow in 15 minutes. But out of that came things like plate tectonics, for instance. Revelle's also remembered as one of the key people in the modern theories of, of global warming. And of course, they were delighted at the idea that there should be all these spin-offs to non-military science and application. But the core mission was to set up what would be the ultimate Cold War university. And where better to set it up than on an ex-Marine base? Who better to be its first chancellor than a former Undersecretary of Defense, and so on. Most of you, as faculty or students, were an afterthought imposed on this vision by UCLA and by San Diego politicians who wanted a full-scale UC campus. That's when they began to talk about UCSD as the new Berkeley. But the foundation of the new Berkeley was all military science and military application. General Atomic, of course, today makes drones and Predators. My neighbor across the street is a biker from South Dakota. Used to be a unionized machinist, okay, working for General Dynamics. Now he's a non-union machinist with the world's most awful hours, trying to keep up with the almost insatiable demand for Predators and other drones being developed by General Atomic. San Diego is one of the capitals of automated robotic warfare. And I think in the next few years that will become even clearer. And then there are, a lot of familiar kinds of military contractors. Hughes Network Systems, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Cordis, Scientific Research Corporation, Raytheon, which develops the ship defense system, anti-missile systems for the Navy. Sandia National Labs, which is where atomic weapons are developed, okay? And then virtually tested at Lawrence Livermore's new multi-billion-dollar laser facility, because the UC is still in the business of testing and preserving the nuclear arsenal. NavAir North Island, which procures through Navy Air Wing, up-to-date, research and technology. And I could go on, but there's one other that's worth particularly missing, and that's the Titan Group. Now, Titan is a company, I think it's something like L3 Titan now. It's a company that's spun off of General Atomics, okay? The original spin-offs did not come from Qualcomm or any of that. They came from General Atomics, 60 firms that emerged out of it, and God knows how many that came from what's now Leidos. But Titan is particularly interested because they were the ones who gave the most money to Duke Cunningham. Our Vietnam naval ace is also possibly the most corrupt congressman in the 20th century. And just like Duncan Hunter, the congressman, Duncan Hunter Jr., out in Elkhorn where I grew up, nobody can tell the difference between, you just vote Duncan Hunter. You don't know you're voting for the old guy or the young guy. They look about the same. But they're wholly owned subsidiaries of General Atomic. In the same way, Cunningham was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Titan Group. They have many, many divisions, and one of them provided personnel that were involved in torturing people at Abu Ghraib. They were also convicted and given a huge fine for bribing the president of Benin. It goes on and on and on. So that's, okay, the second side of the Iron Triangle. So when you come here, you come to meet this history of the Scripps Institute becoming, the source of one of the key revolutions in warfare, Second World War, one of the major Ally advances, which is kind of underwater radar using sound waves, sonar. And then after the war, the real golden age of oceanography begins hand in hand with the development of a missile-armed nuclear fleet capable of wiping out, well, not just the Soviet Union, you name it. A lot of this came out of here, and it came out of the Marine Physical Lab, which is still mainly funded and sponsored by the Department of Defense, just down the hill. The Scripps had an important role in nuclear testing in the 1950s. They were out there in Bikini and stuff when H-bombs were dropped. But something I didn't know until a few years ago, I was absolutely flabbergasted by. How many of you heard of Operation Wigwam? Tell them.
They detonated an atomic bomb off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, 450 miles off San Diego, they dropped a 30-kiloton atomic bomb. The Scripps was integrally involved in that. I've talked about Revell and general dynamics. And then we come to a period of insurrection in UCSD's history. And some of you know this much, much better than I do, although it came down a lot in those days. The struggle to set up a third college dedicated to communities of color and to their struggles, and to claim a place for the working class taxpayers of California in the university system, especially at that time. They funded but weren't able to send their own kids to. And this was soon followed by the death of the old line aerospace industry. San Diego reached its height at the end of the 80s and early 90s. It lost 60,000 jobs in San Diego. This was like Pittsburgh if you were a machinist or technician. And the luster of the new economy of technology has covered over the bodies and the human damage that was caused by that. There's an incredible film, I can't remember the name of it, maybe you do, Alexander, about this guy who steals a tank up in Kearny Mesa. Yes. He's the offspring of one of these old-fashioned convict families, living in a neighborhood full of aerospace workers who all lost their jobs, but they own their houses and pass them on to their kids. But their kids were now de-skilled in the new economy. And he goes kind of mad, but in a very interesting way. And of course, at the end, he's killed by a cop, takes his tank, and it's what all of us want to do, right? You want to get behind a big battle tank and run over Mercedes Benzes and stuff, plow right over the suckers. He did that, carefully avoiding pedestrians, but he did a lot of property damage. And then we come to the beginning of the 90s when UCSD reinvents the San Diego economy and the creation of the Connect program, the pioneer in the transfer of technology, the commercialization of technology, in the coordination of research and industry. And what may be most unique about it is turning every member of the science faculty into an entrepreneur. Okay? Don't apply for a job here unless if you don't want to be the new Irwin Jacobs. You're not planning to organize a startup. And the university will help you to have a whole entrepreneurial center here in the Jacobs School. Oh, this wonderful USD Center for Extreme Events. I was thinking if I could apply for the faculty of it. It's the immense pressure over there. The engineering building that has this like giant press of some kind. And says, earthquake engineering. But they do that, but a majority of the research has to do with explosives, with IEDs. UCSD is big into car bombs and defenses. And finally, let me just run through, out of an endless number of research projects and PhDs here, there were a couple I found particularly interesting. UCSD is apparently leading the world in cyber security and the Internet of Things. Okay? The Internet of Things, of course, is the connection not only of all, laptops and so on, but of all sensors, embedding it in the landscape, smart buildings, all of it intercommunicating with one another. And this poses enormous problems of secrecy and confidentiality. Not your secrecy and confidentiality, but the government's. As I say, they do all this interesting research on high explosives and tracing high explosives, and they have something called smart dust. And I wrote a kid's book about 15 years ago that has some smart dust in it, and some graduate students at MIT had just come up with the concept of a microprocessor almost to the size of dust, sprinkle in a room. It can transmit sounds and, sense vibrations, even someday send back pictures. UCSD is the cutting edge. It's really big on things like telescopic contact lens for the military. So a soldier would go into battle, and by this time, it'd probably be all prosthetics and stuff. You put in one of these contacts, and it just gives you a normal clear view. But if you wink, it gives you 2.5 power magnification. Wink again, you shut it off. Apparently, it already exists here. And I'm talking just about the unclassified research. Big cryptography program in the Department of Engineering. I saw a thesis on post-quantum cryptography. Jesus, I thought quantum was the last frontier. There's apparently post-quantum. I could go on and on. Now, to sum up, I'm an administrator. I walk in the room. I hear this old hippie guy who brags about how many socialist tourists live at his house. And he's talking down all this stuff. He's talking down the fact that UCSD gives world leadership in biotechnology and all kinds of health technologies. UCSD is involved in the military in new treatments for wounds, for the detection of bombs, chemical weapons, and biological weapons. And even if it is directly involved in weapons systems themselves, so what, Mr. Big Shot, beating it socialist? Who's going to protect you from becoming a head on a stick somewhere? The problem, of course, is that technology is a giant circus tent. And inside, you'll find both miracles and monsters. And UCSD is centrally involved in producing both of those things. And so my wisdom for today is simply this. What responsibility do we have to know about this, to monitor this? It's not as easy as it used to be to separate military uses from civilian uses. Some things are miracles and monsters at the same time. Liberatory technologies, but also the end of privacy. The fact is, though, that nobody monitors this. Nobody at all. Sometimes they're brave souls who speak out. Sometimes a particular issue will become the glint in the eye of a few fanatic activists on its UC campus. But basically, this happens day in, day out in all of our names. And we're not even in a position to see it all. I mean, what I've given you is just, tiny little view. Who sees the big picture? Who understands the coordination, the diversity of all this stuff on a system-wide level. Who's protesting the fact that the business school here has the U.S. Israel Center? I believe very much in the right of the Israelis to coexist with Palestinians in a single democratic secular state. But my God, should the University of California be sending off entrepreneurs to meet with the IDF and talk about the needs in military technology and how Israeli military research can help ours and vice versa? Many disturbing things like this. And I just retired from UC Riverside. No more 200-mile round-trip commutes. And I am old. I still exist for some period of time. So I'm not going to propose any solutions. But I leave it, in a sense, on your lap. The need to at least make visible what we do here, how this campus and city really earns its living, and the kind of Faustian bargains that are made. Already I have an administrator yelling in my ear about this. I don't know why we ever gave you tenure, you bastard, get out of here. Okay. That's all I have to say. I need you to translate. This is my wife, Alexandra Montezuma, who runs the art gallery and the curatorial, I was trying to pronounce it, studies program at Mesa College. She's going to translate because I'm basically deaf and I won't hear you. So if anybody wants to ask questions or make comments, she'll tell me what you said.
Thank you so much. So I have a question about getting the kind of data that's necessary to do the kind of work you're proposing. I'm a graduate student here, and my research is actually on the Jacobs School and the nanoengineering department. And I've had a very difficult time trying to get information, for example, about ONR funding for the programs. And actually just even trying to find out what information is public or private, it's difficult to get that answer. And I was wondering if you have any insights about that.
About how to access data to find out about these issues, because she's a graduate student, she had a difficult time researching and getting access to information.
Well, everything I just told you,
particularly military funding for
Particularly military
the program.
funding.
Yeah, everything I told you today, I found out yesterday in 2 hours. 2 hours on Google. Seriously, the military stuff, I'm still the kid from the 1950s, and as much as I may be an inveterate peacenik, I'm still enthralled by, what the military is up to in San Diego County. I knew about this, but I had no idea about the other stuff. I'm not sure there's any system of disclosure here. I'm not sure that what information you're given about classified research that you won't find on Google. The point is that it's time not only for UCSD, but for all the UC campus to begin to regrow a conscience, to have a conscience again, and take some responsibility for at least knowing these things. And individuals can make tremendously useful contributions to that. There's only more needs to exist. Faculty and students need to insist that there actually is some center invigilating the work of all the other centers, acting as a kind of collective ombudsperson for university. Because however you feel about any of this, you certainly have a right to know. One of the reasons I retired from UC Riverside, I was tired of working at a high school. I was tired of administration that didn't deign to provide any information to faculty, would fire a dean without telling us why. And I was thinking, Jesus, 1964, the chancellor would be hanging from the rafters, a rope tied around him. And I happened to work with some colleagues who were very brave, and they tried to stand up and were immediately slapped down. I mean, we were 20 years into the dark side here. Now, I'm not a fan of Rand Paul. I'm an opponent of Rand Paul on most things. But I don't know, how many of you have seen his 1984 video? It's one of his, you should get on the internet, instant. Big campaign video. 1984 is here. Privacy has been, destroyed. Security trumps all. It basically claims we're living on the edge or already in a totalitarian society. And then, of course, there's people like Mark Zuckerman who just say, well, get used to it. He argues that the transition from Web 1.0 to 2.0 inevitably involves the disappearance of privacy. Full stop. Nothing bad about that. Our worship of these young geniuses, in their inventions, have become a very, very, dangerous narcotic in itself. We got to stop smoking, Facebook and Google, and waiting for them to deliver the millennium, or I guess it's now called the singularity.
Hey, Mike, thanks again.
She'll translate.
All right. So we looked at some of these sort of, like if there was a Mount Rushmore of San Diego, you gave us some of those guys, right, revealing those dudes. But if you were writing a counter history of San Diego, what people would you place up in the counter history of San Diego? I'm thinking of people like Jim Stone and dudes like that from the old days.
Now you talked about Ravel and all these other characters that make up this Mount Rushmore, but who would make up the counter history of San Diego, like Jim Stone and other people who worked with some of those
I
characters?
mentioned Jim Stone,
You mentioned it.
Yeah.
my cousin.
Yeah.
A really great man. Yeah, married to my cousin. There's a book called Under the Perfect Sun that San Diego tourists never see that Kelly Mayhew, Jim Miller, and I wrote. And Kelly has a long section on the activists in San Diego. Jim exhumes all the radical humanist ghosts from San Diego's past. And I do what I do best, which is something called The Next Little Darling, which is to talk about the reign of white Republican millionaires that dominated, San Diego since the turn of the century. I get a little bothered these days because people are, really eager to find and kind of beatify a handful of activists from the past. I found the Selma movie deeply disturbing because it wasn't about the movement. It was about the man. But everything that happened because of movements and ordinary people. And there's this kind of selective editing of a narrative that does get recognition to some people who probably turn over in their graves. I mean, Malcolm X gets a postage stamp. What would Malcolm X say about that? Believe me, he wouldn't be happy. It's not just the people and not the icons we have to exhume. We have to exhume the ability of people, ordinary people, to change history. And see, this is the thing that distinguishes my generation from most later generations. I have kids of kind of two generations, kid in their 30s, little kids in 11. Because I saw, even when I didn't believe it was possible, I saw social miracles happen in the 1960s. I saw white high school kids in, Iowa, and, black tenant farmers in Arkansas, junior college students in California, do incredibly brave, morally inspired things. I mean, incredibly brave. I'm writing with John Wiener, who's biographer of John Lennon, a history of LA in the 60s. And I'm trying to get in contact with a group of 5 kids from Santa Ana Junior College I was the first SDS organizer in LA. I wasn't a student, I was just a rabble rouser. And these 5 guys, 2 Chicanos, 3 white, decided to form an SDS chapter. The head of the college told them, if you try and register SDS, I will expel you, I'll have you arrested and drafted in that order. He did. And he did exactly what he said. And they just went on and did it anyway. These are 5 people you're not going to read about in any history of the New Left SDS. So tens and tens of thousands of people. I mean, people go on about 3 or 4 of the most colorful or powerful leaders of the Black Panther Party. But, you know, there are thousands of other people. Some of them still meet in the LA range. You know, they're still out there. You know, the people who survive. So I think the most important thing is not only to make visible hidden histories, but to reconnect the experience of generations. And I say this without any sense of believing that the 60s, I mean, the white left in the 60s was defeated. Look what it's left you. Okay? I'm making no claims about the heroic things we did back then, because we failed to let the world we live in now, with ordinary people and students. Just miraculous things. But there was a sense, there's still a sense in the United States, derived, I think, from the 30s, in the 1940s, of a kind of moral citizenship in this country. It doesn't exist much today. Students don't think much about war because my wife's school, she has plenty of veterans. I've only had 1 veteran in all my classes at Riverside. Now they're not a separate caste. And their experiences are outside the perimeter of our knowledge.
Thank you also for your talk. Vijay Prashad was here last week and he talked a little bit about the external forces pressing against American power internationally. And the generation you came from obviously had internal resistance, but it had all of the things in the world that were happening. So I'm curious your sense of where an institution like UC San Diego stands in a world where maybe the United States is declining in its international ability to deploy nuclear weapons all over the place, or continue to act as the only international force, or if you think maybe it's as powerful as it's been for some time. Just curious about your read on the international counterpoint to the local situation that you sketched out.
Well, lots of people tend to think in this model in international relations of hegemons and hegemony. Where the most economically powerful country becomes militarily powerful and then kind of organizes the institutions to make global capitalism possible. 2 years ago, I spent an afternoon in Coronado with Admiral Weisskopf, the president of the Naval War College. He'd invited me to be part of a little symposium weekend retreat at the Naval War College. And when I first heard this, I was trying to think, which one of my son of a bitch friends would send me this message? Now it turned out to be true, and I explained to him, that I appreciated it, but I won't contribute to the war effort. And he was very nice, and he replied, he said, okay, you'd be averse to just getting together one-on-one. I come out to Coronado all the time. So we meet in Coronado, and he's in a short-sleeved white shirt and some stiff ramrod up his ass. Young ensign there carrying, I don't know what it is, the red phone or something. And
Orange codes.
I'd written this book about car bombs, which has been adopted at West Point, the Army War College, and so on. And I thought this was something about that. It wasn't. It was about this book I wrote called Planet of Slums. And then I thought, well, it'll be, about the uncontrolled slum peripheries of cities that pose the greatest problem to American women. It wasn't about all that at all. He just sat there and he said, when I commanded the USS Ronald Reagan Task Force, it was really a bitch to bomb wedding parties in Afghanistan. We did not have a nice day. But when my kids, as he refers to them, when my kids helped out after the great tsunami, the great earthquake and tsunami, he said that was tremendous. He said they loved that. He said they're so proud of that. And so what we talked about was the fact that the U.S. Navy is the only institution in the world, the only force in the world that can basically deliver the infrastructure of a medium or large city to anywhere in the shores of the world ocean. It can bring in the power plant, the hospitals, the rescue helicopters, and everything. What wanted to ask me about, which of course I couldn't answer, was what happens, how many more disasters like this are there going to be? He says Congress will never appropriate the funds to allow us to do this on a greater or more frequent scale than we do it today. And I said, well, triage. Big part of the world is basically condemned to death. And he said, I agree. But what answer could I give him to how to fund the Navy to rescue people instead of bombing their wedding parties? But one of the most interesting things he said, and this is the response to your question, is they have a big working group on deglobalization. Now, the foreign policy intellectuals, the State Department types, they still think in old-fashioned terms of Kissingerian, realist terms about the war. The military intellectuals are far beyond that. I mean, they are kind of superficially addicted to whatever the latest buzzword is, networks, the revolution in military affairs, new kinds of corporate organization. But they are well aware that globalization may just be a passing, unstable, and explosive stage of international order or disorder. So they're actively thinking over a horizon that nobody else would officially admit. Because what is our foreign policy except to enforce globalization, including on people, who violently dislike it and don't want it. I just think of almost everything about even the new future is going to be ruled by the laws of chaos. You can't extrapolate, except about a couple of things, and those are very important things. The biggest problem in the world, in my opinion, is that capitalism no longer exploits enough of us. Okay? The majority of labor on this planet is now redundant to the needs of that globalized system of production, consumption, and wealth. The International Labor Organization the other day came out with the most astonishing fact I've probably ever heard, which is 75% of people in the world's potential workforce, that is, people over 18, physically fit to labor, don't have permanent jobs. Only 25% of the world does. Other people, including the majority of the population in many Latin American cities, almost every African city, and many Asian cities, survive in the so-called informal economy. Now, if you lost your grant, got fired tomorrow, were forced to live on the street, people may call you homeless and unemployed. But for measurements involving third world economy, you'd just be joining the informal economy. And you'd find some way, you'd have to find some way to survive, as people do. In other words, our present socioeconomic system has not only failed, but no longer itself believes it has the capacity to give people socially meaningful jobs and to extract their surplus value. And when people are structurally redundant in the world economy, they're not very important. They're mainly a problem. And the moral calculus that arises from this, inevitably, is a terrifying one. The second thing we know for sure is the world will continue to urbanize at a rapid rate, maybe less of a future in megacities than some people proclaim. It'll above all be kind of medium-sized cities all over the world. And that's a pretty good future too, because apart from China and a few other examples in Southeast Asia, there's no infrastructural investment. There's totally inadequate investment in sanitation. And above all, in the thing that most people move to the cities for from the countryside, which is education. You see in the Middle East, the example of societies which have actually, in their nationalist, revolutionary nationalist period, like in Egypt, created a fairly impressive educational system, but there are no jobs. And you see what that turns into. And then finally, of course, we're living on a different Earth. Our children will inhabit a different Earth. My little kids, our younger kids who are 11 years old, okay, 11 years old, in their lifetime, they've seen the following, so far, they've seen the following things. The majority of the population of the world becoming urban rather than rural. In 2000, it was estimated that 90% of the information, the stored information, the stored culture of humanity was in some analog form. You know, books, films, etc., and only 10% in digital. A couple of years ago, it was reversed. Now it's 90% digital. Who knows what I mean? My little kids, between 4th and 5th grade, the geologists, the London Geological Society, which is the sovereign body in these things, pronounced that the Holocene epoch had ended, and we're now living in the Anthropocene, which means 10,000 years from now, if you dig deep enough, you'll find a layer of sedimentary rock and stuff, impregnated with isotopes and particulate carbon and all kinds of things. Marks a new geological age. My kids, long before they're my age, will see the maximum build out of the human population, 9.5, 10 billion around 2050, 2060. These are reliable estimates. No generation in the history of the world has lived in its own lifetime through such epochal changes. And there's simply, simply an exercise in fantasy to imagine a hegemony capable of organizing and getting things right. The great advantage of the Cold War, at least, was that it forced the two superpowers to embrace some future for all people. That is, the Soviets promised everybody in the world a 5-year plan. Go work in a steel plant or build bad cars somewhere. But everybody gets a job, everybody gets a job. Everybody, because no square inch of Earth anywhere on the planet that wasn't consequential in the Cold War, on which side it was on. In turn, we promised the free market, you know, American levels of consumption. Everybody would be saved if they chose the right side. Modernization on one side, and Soviet totalitarianism on the other. The minute the Cold War ended, this discourse evaporated totally. The only person I can think of who right now is talking about humanity as a whole, probably Pope Francis, and maybe some leaders of other religion. The Obama administration doesn't. This country doesn't. Putin certainly doesn't. And China is, as we know, extremely reluctant to step up to the plate and rescue the poor of the earth at this point. And in a sense, nothing is forcing them to. And even the smallest reforms will only happen if people are forced to, because it involves giving up some small quantum, at least, of power or property. I've spoken far too long. Thank you very much for showing up.